meeting and admitting people, you forget.
I know. It was right in my mind too, but we just had a little bit of that little distraction. But all is well. It was only 60 seconds. We got the most important stuff in.
Hey Lisa, how are you? It's nice to see you virtually.
I'm good. How are you? Nice to see you as well. Thanks for inviting me.
You're welcome. I can tell by everybody who looks so nice that they all have central air or an air conditioner in their room or a fan on. No? I have this contraption set up here. I have a little fan across from me here. We'll see how it goes.
Vermont is central air.
Well,
right, Bruce?
That's right.
I mean, I'm not sure what it's like up there today, but Boston, it's 79 with an east breeze, a nice sea breeze. It's about 91 with 70% humidity. I'm about 7 miles away, so no sea breeze for me.
Yeah,
probably like it is down in Missouri.
You know what? I think they said with the heat index today, it was going to be like 105.
Ooh.
Nice day to be inside.
So you trumped us here. Yeah, we're, still, we don't like the humidity.
Tomorrow's supposed to be worse. Oh.
Yeah, no. I work in the basement. My office is off the basement, so I get a fairly cool. I have to wear a light jacket just because it gets cool enough because the central air is right adjacent to it. So
my heart aches.
Yeah, no, sorry. If it looks
just
so
psychologically
right now, I'm wearing a jumper
me.
here.
Yeah. Put a hat on and some mittens. And
yeah, I know. I'm going like this.
Yeah. A good day to be in the AC, not working on the AC.
That's true.
Yeah,
that's very true.
Yeah.
Well, I'll let you all in on a secret, you early bird. So this may be, I'm lurching along here on an aging HP Pavilion that has served me well. That has a great display that I'm really going to miss, but I'm getting all kinds of disk errors and problems. Hopefully we make it through the next hour and a half, so we'll have to see. So if the screen goes blank, John, take over.
Yeah, that's all right. We'll wing it from there.
Now we got a bunch of pro debuggers here. If we can't do it, nobody can do it.
Yeah, we'll be all right.
So I have a nephew who is a busy guy. I don't hear from him too much. He's out in Sacramento, and he works for Intel. So I hit him up for some suggestions, for an average sort of middle of the line, multifunctional laptop. And of course, everything has an Intel, inside that he suggests. But he was trying to talk me into a Microsoft Surface, which might just be too much for me, So I don't know. Might be like trying to give a 15 tube Midwest to a AA5 guy. I don't know. We'll see. See where we go with this.
I haven't looked at those very carefully, but I think they're not as versatile as sort of the general purpose Windows 10 computer, Dell, Hewlett Packard kind of thing.
Yeah, he's a funny kid. He's a very bright guy, and obviously he's in that field. So they're looking, they're all looking for the latest. What's the coolest display, and what can we do? Can we fold it 3 times? And I'm not real sure. I'd like to open it up and go. So
yeah,
and that's about it for me. But
well, it's their solution to the Apple iPad, like the iPad Pro.
Yeah.
That's what we have. Here is one of the devices, and my wife has that one. She really likes it a lot. It's a really powerful machine. In fact, I still have the iPad 2 that we bought back in 2007. I still use it. It's still actually adequate. It's slow, but it still gets the job done. If I need a quick reference, I don't have to boot up. It boots up, milliseconds. It's fine. So I hate to throw away equipment that still has some viable life to it.
We don't throw away anything, John. That's our problem.
Well, that is yes, that is. I can think that's really
our ongoing. That's not a real surprise,
I think we have to bring someone in who specializes in old equipment hoarding or something, and talk us off of it.
That's Bruce Phillips. He says he handles, what does he call it? Accumulations. That's I like
Yeah.
that's a good euphemism.
I have a talk, the psychology of collecting. I'm not sure I want to give it to this group, though.
Well, we'd like to hear it.
That means
It's a tongue-in-cheek kind of talk, so it may be safe.
I helped a woman with a loan, and she had down for her occupation, she was an organizer. So I had to ask, well, what do you organize? Do you organize, workers? Do you organize, Well, I help people get organized. And I said, really? And apparently she has, consultancy type business, and she gets references from social workers and the like, and deals with people who have hoarding issues, significant issues, and tries to, get them over the hump as far as, what you can part with and what you can't, and make arrangements to have it shipped out and whatnot. So it was kind of a niche, but I have to admit, I had never really thought of that. And she says, the business is good.
It's a really, really serious problem. I'm sure many of us have been in houses that are absolutely packed with stuff that the people have hoarded. I remember one guy who had radios stacked up to the ceiling in every room in his house. He'd even had them in the bathtub and in his bedroom. So he was living in the kitchen, and it was just amazing.
wow. When you have it in your bathtub, there's a problem.
Yeah, he had a problem, all right. I think many of you probably know him or knew him. I forget his name happily.
Well, I must confess, I do have one of those hang in the shower radios, so I can listen to the shower or listen to the radio while I'm in the shower, but at least the bathtub's still functional.
It's the old
guy in
Rodney.
Vermont, Tom?
Yes, sir.
Okay, yeah, I'll try to do his name myself. But I certainly visited him at one time. It's been a while. How do I find my settings button here, guys?
Your settings button. So
What settings do you want
The
to
little
set?
gear guy.
for
I want to stick a background in.
whoa, okay. So I
Over
think
by the video. Go to the video, the
Yeah.
little up arrow there by your video, and then it'll let you choose a virtual background. You see the
Okay,
video?
I'm sorry. Go
camera?
ahead again.
Lower left of your screen, you'll
Lower
see a
left.
video camera with a little up arrow. Hit the up
Yeah,
arrow.
hit the up arrow. Here we go.
choose your virtual
Choose
background.
virtual background. There we go.
So you're going to give us something impressive here, Bruce?
No, I was just gonna pick one here, but I've been told I can.
It's a little tricky, Bruce, because if you try and show something in your hands, it confuses the
It won't
background and
do it,
makes
huh?
life absolutely miserable.
Okay, so
I like your current background, Bruce. All that
okay,
stuff.
so we'll
No sharing.
virtual background.
Yeah, I think it's a pretty impressive background. I mean, look at, Tom always has an impressive background there. Lots of great equipment. Yeah, so is Bruce Burgess there with I see all sorts of equipment back there. So everyone's got, yeah, very nice. Look at that. Come on, everybody. Ooh and ah.
Call Chris.
Yes.
You have his number, right?
Yes.
Call him and ask him what the number to dial.
That's Fred. He's just joining us, and he's got his mic. He's talking to someone, so I muted him. Fred,
Oh,
we muted you while you were talking to somebody. I'll unmute you now. Welcome, Fred.
Hello.
hello, Fred.
Fred is from the New Jersey Antique Radio Club and interested in, I think he joined NEVEC and is joining us, right, Fred?
I'm a 10-year member. Like I wrote in my email, I hope I live that long.
Best bargain in the house.
We have the net on Tuesday night, NJARC. It's kind of unofficial. Me and Neville, and we're on usually like 39 25ers thereabouts. So, it's kind of growing a little bit, which is good. Everybody's welcome.
That's good.
Fred, we did invite Rich Lee on tonight as well. He recently joined. So you guys have more Zoom meetings. I see all these invitations constantly showing up. Daytime meetings, evening meetings. You are all over it down there.
Yeah,
Hey,
we
Fred,
have tonight at 9 o'clock.
Let me mute myself.
Fred, I hear rumors that the New Jersey Antique Radio Club is going to try and hold their meet. What is it, in July or August? Is that true? September?
Yes, it is. I believe it's either 27th or 29th. It's going to be down at Info Age. We'll use social distancing or whatever we need to do, and we're going to go with it. You know, I mean, I go to ShopRite every day, so what's the difference?
Well, we're all meeting deprived, so you may find us all there camped out, ready for the meeting.
Yeah, I'm gonna get a table, and I got a bunch of little things or big things to, you know, offer up. I'm trying to get my sweetheart to get on Zoom and get her own account, because there's a church meeting that we usually both attend, and it's at 7:30, but you know, she's going to try and do it by phone this time until we work this out.
Okay.
Thank you very much. Who's moderator here?
Well, we have Paul over in the upper
Hey, Fred.
right-hand corner, and then here's myself.
Tom is our founder.
Yeah, Tom's our founder. We just follow in his
It's
footsteps.
Founders Day today.
Oh, I see Joe down there. I've told he's been on the net with us a number of times.
Yep.
Well, it looks like we have a few more participants here, so we'll give them a couple of
Oh,
minutes.
there we go. Add a few more in. Boom, Larry, George.
Lisa, have you Zoomed with a radio club before? I know you've spoken to some, but I didn't know if you've ever had a Zoom meeting with them before.
Yeah, we the Fairlawn Amateur Radio Club has one. Split Rock Amateur Radio Club has one. So, and I'm on Groups.io for both. So between that and now Nevic and Antique Radio Club, I'm kind of busy. You know, I get about 400 emails right now.
Okay.
It's all good though. Thank you for inviting me in, and I'm glad I joined.
How about you, Lisa? You must have spoken to at least one or more clubs, or are we your first Zoom?
You're the first. You're the first for Zoom. Yeah.
Yes. Well, we're
Exciting.
delighted.
I'm delighted. Thank you. Thanks for the invite.
I have my show and tell all lined up. It's not one I own, but it's one I would like to. So, but we'll see how that all turns out.
Well, usually if I'm out in my shack, which I normally would be, because I can't read email out there. For some reason, the computers won't do it. But so I can't go to a link and get on Zoom. I have to have the numbers. So that's my only problem. So normally I have a bunch of stuff I could show you guys out there, but that'll be another time.
We'll work on it.
Welcome,
Yeah,
Bill. Bill, you're looking good there, Bill Holly. Can you hear us okay?
Oh, yeah, I can hear you fine. You hear me?
Very well, yes. Glad you could join us.
Great. Well, looks like we have a pretty good group of people. We have, including Lisa, I guess we have a good 21 people. That's not bad. Not bad. I'm sure we'll have more stragglers.
All right. Well, it's about 7:10 almost, John. So
Yeah.
What do you think?
I'd say it's time to start.
It's time to start. Okay.
Close things down at my end, and
you've been recording, so
yes, I have.
even
So
gave you
everyone gets to
an
get all the
extra shot.
preliminary stuff, but
Right
better
now.
early than late.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the New England Vintage Electronics Club Zoom for July 9th, 2020. So has anybody had one of those people come up to you to say, is it hot enough yet? I mean, that's just something, I don't know. That's better left unsaid. Anyway, so we're pleased tonight. We have Lisa Spahr joining us, who's the author of, this will come over, Radio Heroes, Letters of Compassion, which is a very interesting little book here. And I'd like to preface tonight's Zoom with just a few remarks, because this whole era is fascinating to me. And Lisa's book focuses primarily on the work of shortwave radio listeners, civilians here who monitor broadcasts overseas and then were able to ease some anxieties at home. But I think would be a little remiss if we didn't put this whole era in some context, and I'm sure some of you folks are even more familiar than I, though. History has always fascinated me. So, if we go back into when radio really, got started in the 20s, starting to get into homes, and then we look at some of the events that lead up to World War II, which is where our focus will be tonight. So we have the market crash, October 24th of 1929. And then we have the 30s, and we have a depression. And we have dust bowls and black blizzards and more depression. And in 1931, Philco puts out the Model 90. So, 9 years to prosperity, and then, the invasion of Poland in the fall of 1939, and, World War II was on. So, when people discuss the greatest generation, I frequently think of, the World War II years, but I always try to think back to where that generation came from, which was probably born in the 20s and lived through the 30s, and then essentially, gets up off the mat to go to war. And, literally, as my dad would say, we didn't know it, but 25 years later, somebody told me we saved the world, which is pretty awesome. So, I don't think we could overlook that period talking about World War II. So, despite what we might see from the early years in Hollywood, the early parts of the war were pretty bleak with Bataan and the Philippines and the almost domino type overnight overrunning of Europe. And from the States, we've got U-boat war raging unabated off the east coast of the United States and in the Gulf, right on our front doorstep. And on the home front, there's rationing, no gas, no meat, no tires. May we see your A card, please? So, and all during this period, radio boomed. The engineering achievements were remarkable in bringing radios into more and more homes of smaller size and larger size, and more capacities to deliver different types of bands. So shortwave became so popular, especially in the late 30s, and was used as a marketing tool as people started to listen into Europe directly themselves. So, radio really brought the war home in a way that other wars hadn't been. Telegraph and newspaper, and it was a little bit remote, but when you could hear broadcasts from London and Berlin, and you could hear radio broadcasts from all over the States as well, long distance AM DX. I think people were given something that they had never had during wartime before, and it helped meld the nation together. So, I know as collectors, a lot of us prize the sets from the golden age, and shortwave bands were very popular, and even, survived into the 40s on a lot of sets as, we got into the Cold War, and a lot of the, I enjoy my shortwave listening of, all the Eastern Bloc countries, post-war as well. So, I thought it would be a good prelude to tonight's talk, and I thought I knew a good deal about radio history, but I had never heard of this civilian network of folks who sat by their radios late into the evening and would search the Axis broadcasts where they might pick up some positive news about somebody who was put into captivity or had arrived okay, and then would go to the trouble to, find an address, try to send a letter, and actually make somebody feel a little bit better about the situation in their own family, as far as, at least he's alive, there's a good chance. No news was not good news in those days. So that's where Lisa comes in and her book. So I'm going to turn things over to her, and if she could share maybe a little bit of, her personal aspect of things, and then tell us a little bit about how that helped you find out about this very interesting network of civilian listeners.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you, Paul and John, for the wonderful invite. I was excited to get your email maybe a couple months ago, and delighted to join you all via Zoom. I haven't done a Zoom session like this before with a radio club. I just want you to know that I'm monitoring the chat box. So if anybody wants, certainly if I'm talking about something and you just want to share something, or you want to ask a question, feel free to ask that however you're comfortable. Just take yourself off mute and ask the question, or certainly pop it into the chat. I'll be monitoring that, and I'll be happy to answer those questions. I'm coming to you tonight from St. Louis, Missouri. I've lived here for about 8 years. I'm from the East Coast. I'm from Pennsylvania, a small town called Wellsville. It's in York County. It's a very tiny little town. That's where I was born and raised. The journey that I want to share with you tonight actually starts in 2005. I was living and working in the Washington, D.C. area, and I came home to Wellsville, where my family lives. And it's important to know that I have a very small family. I'm an only child, and I never met my father. So my family is my mother, her sister, and her brother. They never married, and they never had children. So I'm the only one in my generation. My grandfather, however, was one of 12. So there's a lot of people in that line, but then we went from 12 to 4. One passed away, and then my mother having only myself. So very small family, and they weren't very happy when I chose to move away. I went to school in Philadelphia, went to graduate school overseas, and then ended up several times in the DC area. So again, I came home, I think it was Easter of 2005, and I knew that we had this trunk in my family's home. My aunt and uncle, they still live in the house that they were born in. And so I knew that they had this trunk that had so many of my grandfather's treasures from his life. And I asked permission to go into that trunk. I don't know exactly what compelled me, but I felt very strongly that I wanted to feel a little closer to him. I lost him when I was just entering my teenage years, and I really missed him. So we started to go through this trunk, and you find these cigar boxes, and they're in basements and attics. And this one just said, "Dad's War Things." And in there, I found my grandfather's, I found his dog tags. And he was in World War II, held prisoner for more than 26 months. He's got this little 4-leaf clover that hangs onto his dog tags. It's just really incredible. There's a little key hanging on here. I don't know what that's to. But we started to go through. We found his uniform. We found his eyeglasses. We found his smoking pipe that he loved. We found lots of coins and other things from his time serving as a prisoner in Germany. I know this is going to be difficult to see, but we found these are German war tags that he had in the prison camp, and it says Stalag 7A, so prison camp 7A. There were these pins, everyone brought back different things, a little pin found in that cigar box, but so many things. And it was very emotional, as you can imagine. The person that you love isn't with you anymore, and it's been many years, and everyone's gathered around that big trunk looking at things. And then we find this cigar box. And it just says war letters from prison. And I thought for sure I knew what was going to be in here. I thought that they were going to be beautiful love letters between my grandfather and my grandmother. They were only dating when he went off to serve in World War II. And so I braced myself for the most beautiful romantic letters I was ever going to read in my life. And that is not, in fact, what we found when we opened that. We found a stack of penny postcards and letters with a piece of twine wrapped around them. And we started looking through, and we saw lots of names, none of them familiar, lots of cities all over the US, lots of states. And we couldn't quite make out or understand what they were about. So I asked if I could take them back to DC with me and spend the next few weeks digesting them. And I'll give you an example of, I have them, when I go around and I do talks, I have them encased in just like a heavy plastic, to try to preserve these things as much as I can. I'll read one to you. It says, "Dear Mrs. Spahr, Saturday, May 8th, from 8:05 to 8:15 p.m. Central Wartime, a German shortwave radio station read messages from 10 Americans who are prisoners of war in Germany. A message to you from Robert Spahr read, arrived safe in Germany as a prisoner. It was announced that these men had recently been transferred from a camp in southern Germany to one in northern Germany. I would be interested in knowing whether you have received any other reports. John R. Fike. And Mr. Fike wrote us from Omaha, Nebraska, and it was a penny postcard. There were 100 letters and postcards like that, and I simply didn't understand. I didn't understand who these people were. I didn't understand shortwave radio. It was a foreign matter to me. I didn't understand ham radio. I didn't understand how these people really knew this information about my grandfather. So it took me several weeks. I would read a few of the letters every night. And the rule was when I became emotional and I started to cry, I'd have to put them down. And that was because I was thinking about my grandfather, who I loved dearly, and thinking about the fact that his mother had 12 children. And when she was pregnant with her 12th child, her husband passed away. So as you would do back in that time that Paul was just telling us about, she had to make some very difficult decisions. And so she chose to literally farm the children out in 3s and 4s to go live on neighboring farms. And so they earned their room and board. And my grandfather and 2 of his siblings went to work on a neighboring farm until they were old enough to get other jobs and take care of themselves. So just reading these letters of people I'd never met all over the country, sending a message to my great-grandmother, my grandfather's mother, to let her know that he had arrived safely in Germany as a prisoner. There were so many elements that I just couldn't understand. But ultimately, luckily, in the age of the internet, it's pretty easy to get a hold of information. And I was able to begin to wrap my head around ham radio and shortwave radio and Berlin radio, learning some of the concepts that would become a little more familiar to me as the years went on. Ultimately, I used to work for the American Legion, the DC office. And so I met with the executive director. We had lunch one day, and I said, John Summers, I said, John, did you know that men and women wrote letters to families like mine during World War II to let us know that our loved ones had been captured and serving as a POW? And he's a history buff, obviously. He's a military history buff. He's a World War II history buff. And he said, Lisa, I didn't know that. And I said, John, do you think it's worth writing a book about it? And he said, yes. And so that's all I needed to hear. I started researching a bit more. And ultimately, what was really important to me was, even though this was more than 60 years later, I wanted to try to find some of the men and women who had written letters to my family. And I wanted to find them first and foremost to say thank you and to let them know what it must have meant to my great-grandmother. I don't know exactly what it meant to her, but I can tell you what it meant to me finding them in 2005 and wrapping my head around what they were and the generosity of these people. So we were lucky enough, I say we because it's always a team of people making something like this happen. And, none of the successes I've ever had have come just by myself alone. But we were able and lucky enough to find some of the original letter writers and postcard writers from 1943. And I wanted to share with you some of those stories today and some of the ways that the journey just became really life-altering, and the stories that we heard were truly amazing. The postcard I just read to you from Mr. Fike in Omaha, Nebraska, unfortunately, I didn't find him in time, but his son was kind enough to write to me. And here's what his son Charles had to say. He said, Lisa, I'm writing in response to your letter, and I'll shorten some of this just to be more concise. He said, your letter was in reference to my father. He died here in 1988. Your letter was touching and uplifting, and we thank you for undertaking your project. He said, I shared your letter with a number of family members, grandchildren and children alike, and am now sending copies to my sister, and everybody was moved by it. He said, the radio that my dad used is still in the family, and one of my wife's nephews has it. The war days were the days before television, and we, like many others, would gather around the big radio in the evening to listen to Jack Benny, Fibber McGee and Molly, Edgar Bergen and Charlie McCarthy, etc. He said the serialized programs. He said, however, as you've now discovered, my dad also listened to shortwave. And he discovered that the Germans were allowing American POWs to broadcast short messages home. My dad took down the messages and the family information, and he attempted to get the information into the hands of the POW's family. He soon realized that very often this was the only information that they had received. But one occasion, the family address did not come through clearly. So Dad did the best he could, but it turned out not to be good enough. His letter bounced around for a while, and I think it got into some dead-end type department at the post office. The letter ultimately came into the hands of the FBI, who became suspicious that Dad might be a German spy. He received a call, and one summer's evening, we were joined in the shortwave listening by an agent who obviously discovered the true state of things. And then he just went on to express some appreciation. I thought that was so very interesting. And I have to say, it was quite common that the people that I learned about, the people I was able to get in touch with, their family members, other people who have reached out with their collections, it was very common that the addresses were difficult to hear. The reception was very difficult. And so often the person would write on the envelope or the penny postcard, postmaster, please find this boy's next of kin. This is about a prisoner of war. And the message still got there. It was so amazing. There was another person, Cynthia McKee, who would just tirelessly try to find the POW's family. If she received letters back saying unable to deliver, she would go through records and she would keep combing towns to try to find that POW family member to deliver this news to them, even though it was so difficult to get the address. I found one gentleman named Flavius Jankowskis outside of Philadelphia in Chalfont, Pennsylvania, and we became quite close. I was so excited to find him, and the way that I found him was quite interesting. I sent a letter to every Jankowskis I could find in the Philadelphia area because it was such a unique last name. I thought I might have luck with this name. And a man named Michael Jankowskis called me one day. I was traveling for business. I'm not sure why. I stepped out of my meeting. I took the call. And he said, Lisa, I'm not related to Flavius. Believe it or not, we share the same last name. He said, but I've heard of him because we share the same last name. And I'm so touched by what you're trying to do because I also had a family member serve. And I'm just really in awe of what you're doing. So let me help you find him. So literally within 1 or 2 days, Michael Jankowskis called me back and gave me Flavius's phone number and address. And so within minutes, I was on the phone with Flavius Jankowskis. When he wrote to my family, he was merely 16 years old. And you wouldn't have known that from looking at the postcard because the penmanship was so beautiful. I just would have assumed it would have been someone who had many, many years of writing. But Flavius sent us a penny postcard. And when I called him and started to introduce who I am and what I'm seeking him for, he was like, oh, you're calling about those letters. And he went on to tell me how being a part of Shortwave was his way to serve during the war. And it really meant the world to him. And he himself then went on to be a merchant marine and went on to do some things with the opera. He was such an interesting, amazing man. But I'll just share with you a little bit about what he said. He said, during the 30s, I developed a keen interest in amateur radio, and I purchased a Howard 430 from my nickels and dimes that I earned on my Liberty magazine route. In 1940, I diligently studied the Morse code, the technical radio knowledge of that time, and the rules and regulations in effect, and took the examination for a radio license by the FCC. In 1940, we were banned from communicating with foreign countries. When December 7th, 1941 happened, all hamming was banned for the duration. However, I continued to monitor and listen to shortwave stations such as the BBC from London, Berlin Radio, and programs from other capital cities, listening to reports of the war's progress from my home in Philadelphia. At US broadcast radio stations, many engineers were called into the service, and I worked as a replacement at one of these stations. It was during the time of listening on shortwave that I heard the POW messages over Berlin Radio. And I started sending notices to families of the POWs, often receiving a response of gratitude for the news. In mid-1943, more than 45 listeners, including myself, were organized by Mrs. Dawn Yant in Ohio into a group known as the Shortwave Amateur Monitors, SWAM. Mrs. Yant assigned several of us to each night of the week to monitor the enemy radio stations so that no family would go without notice. Mrs. Yant also shared the latest in radio news techniques and member news via monthly newsletters. And then he goes on to talking about his own service, joining the Merchant Marines and sailing ships for the war's effort. Flavius, his call sign K3JA. And I wanted to share with you, I met him in person, just such a delightful person. And he was kind enough to give me the Howard 430 that he heard my grandfather's name on in 1943.
Wow.
And, you know, when I visited him, he was such an incredible man. He was having a conversation with me in the room while he was doing Morse code, having a conversation with someone else over the radio. Truly just an amazing individual. And he also shared with me, I thought you might find these interesting. He shared with me QSL cards that he received during the 40s. This is one of my favorites. This lovely young man has his photo on his QSL card, and it says he's age 13. His name is Orville Bean, Orville E. Bean, 55 Long Avenue, Belmont, Mass. And I love that he wrote, beside where it says age 13, he wrote now 14. He wanted to point out he's now 14. And it's just fabulous. Like looking at this, he says, I see that we're the same age, you know, and it was W3JAK, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. I just love Orville Beans. And then let me see this one. This one is, I mean, they were just so cool to find these. This was 1946, Red Benzie. Several of these are 1941. This was Hollywood, California. And just so lovely. This one, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. This one was really interesting. Texarkana, Texas.
Nice.
I mean, some of these cards are
Like the cowboy.
Yeah, I like it.
so incredible. Yeah, so incredible. And then, of course, 1966, Armed Forces Day. So he shared a whole bunch of these with me. And one of the greatest discoveries, as I mentioned, as I read, he shared with me Mrs. Ruby Yant out of Lima, Ohio, who organized 45 of them. And he sent me, I mean, he went into his attic and he just sent me boxes and boxes of material that he still had from the 40s. And he sent all of her newsletters that she would literally hand type and send out to all of those listeners every month, calling out their birthdays, calling out who wasn't feeling well, talking about the interference, talking about some of the propaganda, and, you know, kind of, you know, who not to be listening to. You know, she was just a pioneer in what she was doing. So incredible. Unfortunately, I never found Ruby. I thought I found one of her children, reached out to them, and they just didn't get back to me. And that sometimes happened. I reached out to someone in New York, and I obviously reached the right person, the right family. But I believe that they were a family of great means, and they became concerned when I called back at one point. They wouldn't let me speak to the person that I had spoken to a few days before. And I think, unfortunately, they weren't convinced of my altruistic intentions. In this day and age, I totally get it. When someone calls you and you don't know them, and you might be concerned about really why are they calling and what information they might be seeking. So luckily, for the most part, when I did find people, they were very receptive. They were delighted to talk about that time in their life. Certainly from your neck of the woods, Morton Bardfield. I was so fortunate to find him. Now, he passed away. He became a silent key. I've learned that lingo. He passed away either I don't think it was before the second edition of the book came out, but I believe it was shortly thereafter. But he was so kind. I'll just share with you what he said. He said, like most kids growing up in the 40s, my family evening entertainment was an AM radio console. And he said, most nights I enjoyed programs like The Lone Ranger or Jack Armstrong, The All-American Boy. For me, World War II was a distant struggle and worlds apart, but that changed on my 13th birthday when I received an all-band radio. The reality of the war entered my Dorchester, Massachusetts home when I began to pick up German announcers each evening on Berlin radio, reading in very clear English the names, messages, and home addresses of American prisoners. It would seem that no American could discover these important messages and just switch off the shortwave without sending a note to some parent that their son was alive, no longer missing in action. So it seemed natural to me to mail out these nightly POW reports to the parents on penny postcards. He said I couldn't afford the 3-cent stamps from my paper route earnings. During the war, I wasn't aware that anyone else might also be notifying the parents or the wives. So my postcards became just as important to me as playing soldier or doing my homework. Knowing now that other radio listeners were also sending out notifications, I am sure that no family ever complained about receiving more than one joyous letter. He went on to run and be a part of communications, telecommunications and communications companies. He received a lot of thank you letters from families he sent messages to, and he shared those with me. We developed a wonderful relationship, albeit too short. And it was just nice to hear his perspective and his experience in doing this. It was common to find people that had written more than a couple thousand letters to POW families like mine. As soon as people realized that they could listen and they were going to receive a list of the prisoner's name, next of kin address, and perhaps a message, they would stay up for hours. They would cancel social engagements. They made sure that they were available to try to get this message correctly, to try to get the address correct, and to send a letter or a postcard. One man, Sanford Lowe out of New York, he sent more than 10,000 letters. And the way that I know that is that several of his letters have the number of the letter. So for instance, when he wrote to my great-grandmother, he told her exactly what number her letter was. And he also told her where the postage money came from someone who appreciated what he had done, that they had sent him a few dollars. And he used that money to spend on stationery and more stamps. And later as I started to get other people's collections, I saw that Stanford, he developed a template, and he started to use a template, and then he would just check in the boxes. So he really had quite a process that he changed over time to make it more efficient for him to get these messages and to get them sent out. It was absolutely incredible. I've also learned of people recording on a record the messages. That's truly amazing. There was a Canadian documentary, a radio documentary done on that. And it was because a woman that her mother had received messages from her father, who was a prisoner of war, and she had the record, and she wanted to preserve it, and she wanted a story to be written about it. So someone then reached out to me, and we shared stories, and we tried to help each other understand the experiences. And so that was done probably 5 years ago, the radio documentary. One doctor, actually, Cynthia McKee, the way that they received the radio was her husband was a doctor, and in lieu of a patient paying him, he gave him a radio. And so the Dr. McKee was just, as they say, twirling the dial, and he landed on Berlin radio, and he heard these messages. And so then his wife took it up that she would listen every day without fail, trying to catch the messages. One person wrote, and he said, please tell me if anyone else is writing to you with the same message, because I would like to take a night off here or there. I haven't taken a night off since Christmas, right? So, I mean, these folks, they felt that
Dedication.
duty was to listen and try to get this information and passionately send it out to a family they were likely to never meet, but they felt such a strong obligation to do that. It was a very beautiful thing. Let me see. I'm just combing through. There was something interesting about megacycles. It was detailed, a little too detailed for me, but it was very technical. But I'm sure that you would very much appreciate it, and it would certainly make sense to you. Now I see someone put in here. I love that. Larry said that he knows Wellsville, New York. Oh, Olean, New York. Is that right? I don't meet too many people that know of Wellsville. We have a wonderful lake that my pappy, my grandfather, would take me fishing on. I would get so disgusted though, because everything I caught was too tiny, and he would make me throw it back, and I didn't understand that concept. And but my pappy would take me fishing on the lake. And then we have a little mountain. At least to me as a young person, it looked like a mountain. It's probably a hill, but it's called Ski Round Top. And as a teenager, I worked there and really enjoyed learning to ski on that mountain. It was really fun. Some of the letters you'll see, they mention that this might be the only information the family is receiving. And they're so very right. Now, my family received 100 letters and postcards. I've never seen any collection to that size of the collections people have shared with me over time. And most of those letters and postcards were received by my great-grandmother before the official telegram from the War Department telling her that her son was captured and serving as a prisoner of war.
Wow.
Oftentimes, too, it included so much more information. One woman wrote, I know it by heart, I probably don't even have to look it up. She wrote from the Tutwiler Hotel in Birmingham, Alabama. She wrote a full page. I had to check to see if it was typed or handwritten. It is typed. A full page on letterhead. She must be a part of the hotel chain. And there's a very thick paragraph on that page, and she tells my grandmother, she said, when the Germans officially release Robert's name to the US government, they'll notify you that he's a prisoner of the Germans, and they'll give you instructions how to write and send packages. The package cannot weigh over 11 pounds. It must not contain anything that comes in metallic containers, such as toothpaste or shaving cream. Nothing that comes in cans, but pasteboard boxes and cellophane wrappers are all right. The boys have to wear khaki, so be sure and get khaki socks. You can send a razor and blades, also cigarettes and smoking materials. Dehydrated foods do not weigh much, and dried fruits, she says, are grand for them. A friend of mine sent powdered milk, and her son loves hot chocolate. So she mixed cocoa, powdered milk, and sugar, and all he has to do is add the water and heat it. You cannot send literature, but you can write the publishers, and they can send direct to the Sun. I do think the boys would enjoy Life, Time, and the Reader's Digest. The minute you receive Robert's address, please send it to me, as I've made arrangements to have a Bible sent to each boy. I mean, it was simply incredible. As I said, when I started combing through the letters and postcards, the rule was if I started to tear up and cry, I had to put them away for the night, come back to it the next day, because I was just so in awe of the love and the compassion and the generosity of people who were not connected to Wellsville, Pennsylvania, who were never going to meet my great-grandmother, who had no idea that she had 12 children, 8 of which were boys, all serving in the war, not all overseas and not all seeing combat. But they didn't know that. And the beauty and the comfort of what I'm guessing these postcards and letters meant to her, absolutely, absolutely amazing. I found some of the technical details. So this was in the SWAM bulletin. So this was part of Ruby's monthly typed sendings that she would give to everybody. She's talking about, I don't know whether you have ever known a complete list of the station calls and their frequencies of the various German stations. So I will write them here. She goes on to write probably 25 stations. DJC 6.02, DXP 6.03, DXX 6.14. Then she goes on, another 20 of those. Then she goes on to say, and you might be interested in following transmissions I observed at various places, all Eastern wartime. Radio Saigon, French Indochina in English, 10.40 to 11 a.m., 11.77 megs. Chungking XGOY in English, news, 6 and 10 a.m., 11.88 megs. She goes on with Moscow, Budapest, Brazilville, Algiers. It's simply incredible. She gives advice for ways to try to improve the
Reception?
frequency, what word am I missing?
Reception?
The reception, thank you. She gives advice to try to improve that. Just absolutely amazing. As I said, we have more than 100 of those. One man wrote, because it was May, he wrote, I hope this is a welcome Mother's Day gift to you to know that your son is alive. And I mean, I cannot imagine, right? I wanted to see what else I might have to share with you. Any questions or comments at this point? I can blether on about this for hours, so I don't want to keep repeating what you're already getting the picture of.
Well, I will let you know that Mr. Bardfield was born and lived for a little while, because then he moved to a little fancier neighborhood. He grew up in the particular section of Boston that I am from.
Oh,
so
wow.
that's where you get an accent like this and learn how to talk funny. But, you know, what you're expressing, though, is very typical of of that generation. You know, everybody was all in, up and down the line. So whether it was listening at home and writing letters, or whether it was scrap metal drives or newspaper drives, or, you know, making a joke because, you know, this is probably the third night we haven't had any meat to eat. But, you know, when talking just to my grandparents, who had a very large family, they lived right in the city. My dad was one of 13. He joined the Navy at the age of 16. And I don't think he was much of a letter writer, but he was stationed in the Pacific. And the letters were few and far between. I had asked my grandparents if he wrote much, and they said, well, he was probably a little busy. But occasionally, you know, so you think about the time between contact now, between email or cell phone or making a telephone call. they may not have heard from him for 16 months at a time. They got I believe he was discharged in 46 or early 47, and they hadn't heard from him in some time. They received a telegram from San Francisco, and he was asking for train fare home and spending money because, of course, what does any sailor who's discharged in San Francisco do, which is spend every dime and fritter everything away, having one hell of a time. And I don't have it on my computer. I can't share it with you, but I have a great photograph that he somehow managed to save through the years. It's him and 4 of his friends. And if you look at them, you would say there's no one here older than 18. And, there's a couple of guys from Texas. There's a guy from San Francisco. He's written their names. He wrote, it was from Carl's Place in San Francisco, which is not probably one of the more reputable bar rooms in San Francisco. The table is strewn with empties and cigarettes, and the smiles are a mile wide because they were all going home. So my grandfather, of course, responded that he was home in Boston with 10 children and had no money, and asked my father to send the same. So he stayed in San Francisco for a couple of months, sweeping floors and loading trucks, and eventually made it back to Boston. But much like after 9/11, there was a little bit more of congeniality amongst us as Americans. I think it's hard for us to grasp how everybody was everybody's neighbor during World War II. And just to walk down the street, especially in a city, you would point out, Mrs. So-and-so has somebody in the Navy, he's in the Marines, she just got word, she lost her son. It was right next door. And that's why it was a very important thing to reach out like that. It was very nice, very nice.
Oh,
Lisa,
yes.
what's the name of your book, please?
Yeah, and I can put it in the chat too. It's World War II Radio Heroes, Love of Compassion.
Is it still in print?
It sure is. It's ARRL. Typically, they sell it. It's available via Amazon. And if you ever get into a pinch, you can just reach out to me. And if I have copies here, I'm happy to sign them and send them on. And if I don't, it just takes me a little bit of time to order some in. And I'm happy to do that.
Sure, thank you.
And oh, of course, you're welcome. Thanks for asking.
Well, we're doing pretty well on time here, and I'm guessing some of you may have some things for show and tell, but does anybody else have a World War II radio story or a comment or a question for Lisa?
Lisa, a quick question. I saw a second edition. Are there additional information in the second edition, or what was the scoop? Because I saw there was, a first edition out there as well.
Yeah, George, thanks for asking. So there was a great sense of urgency for me with the first edition of the book. I felt like we were sitting on such an amazing story that had not been told. It had been told in some radio circles, but unless you were a ham or a shortwave listener, you were unlikely to know about this at all. And to me, that just felt, it made me very sad. And so when John Summers gave me the thumbs up and said, Lisa, I think it's worth writing a book about it, I feverishly just wanted to get something out there. I just wanted to start to tell the story, to say thank you. And I knew that we were losing so many of these wonderful men and women every day that I was trying to celebrate, that I didn't want to get caught up in the perfect book or the perfect editor. I mean, my editor was amazing, but I just wanted to get something out there. So the first edition is a really teeny tiny book. I mean, it's just teeny tiny, but it was us just trying to get something out really quick. And we received a lot of great attention around it. The Radio and Television Museum, people were so generous. Skyview, people were wonderful to us with the first edition. But then what happened is people started to send me their collections. And this thing, which was really small and was really just a subset of some of the Spahr letters, I realized that there was so much more to tell because I was getting new collections. I was finding more people. And so in the second edition, I published all of the Spahr letters. Plus, I publish the responses of some of the people that I found, and I publish some of the other people that shared their collections with me. So between the first edition and today, we also have an audiobook. The audiobook is 3 CDs, and it's from the first edition. And that is something that I just produced 500 copies of. So I think I'm about down to like 20 of those, and I have them here at my house. But what was I going to say? The second edition, it's so much of a more robust story. And even after publishing that, people still were sending me collections. And just 3 months ago, someone from Seattle walked into a antique store and found a collection of letters. And so he sent me, he has a beautiful website, and I'll put it in the chat box. And he wants to write his own book, right, about this story and about learning about this woman that wrote all of these letters. So it's really morphed into such an amazing storytelling session. And I've documented more than 300 men, women, and children that were POW message relayers. During that time, I have them identified by name, city, state. We have a number from Massachusetts, a number from Vermont, a lot from New York, a lot from New Jersey. So I keep a running list of those folks because ultimately I would like to get them congressionally recognized.
Yes, I was going to ask where that
yeah,
effort
even
went.
though even though many are not here today, I'm sure that their family members would be proud to stand up on their family members' behalf to accept that honor. I haven't received any traction on that. I think it's just going to take finding the right representative who's willing to champion it and, get behind it a bit. I haven't quite found that person or gotten quite the rally that I would like around that. But I will tell you, there's a woman who's now in the Portland area who has written a play based on this story and this book. And she's currently reading it around the table with various actors. So I think in some time we continue attention. And I think it's just a matter of time before someone realizes that this is a wonderful effort to get behind, and it's a great time for us to find something to be united about. And I can't imagine anyone who wouldn't want to celebrate the role of radio and these men and women and children during the 40s. So I think it's just a matter of finding the right people, being a little patient, mixed with a little bit of assertiveness too.
Well,
Thank you.
I can tell
Thank
you who would have gotten some recognition for them, so growing up in the city and being on the make as a kid, as you were for a few bucks, one of the things we would frequently do is you'd walk down before the social media age. Everybody who was running for office would have a storefront office in all of the neighborhoods of the city. So $5 got you about 1,000 cards to go stick in different mailboxes. And I don't remember too many of them. I remember a few names because they were friends of our family. But on every one, you would turn it over. There was a Union printing bug on the back, and it would say, it was the city of Boston, of course, Democrat, veteran, Democrat, veteran. I mean, everybody was, that was your ticket, and those guys didn't forget, and they were very good in starting some of the programs that came through at least the state and city level to work with some of the vets, even the kids who were coming home at that time, coming home from Vietnam. So too bad. We missed it by a generation or two, but I hope it gets done. Anybody else have any other questions for Lisa? Comments?
Oh,
Well,
sure.
thank you, Lisa.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
John, maybe you just could mute and unmute people so we don't have we don't talk over.
Right.
Bill's got his hand up.
Yeah, I wanted to tell Lisa that during the 70s, I was in the Coast Guard. I was a radio operator, and I was also a ham. And when I was out to sea, my wife would use one of my general coverage receivers to listen to shortwave. And she'd often write to the station she'd heard and ask for a verification card, what we call a QSL card. And one day I was on the ship in port, and the Coast Guard Investigative Service, like the NCIS and the Navy, come in and said, "Hey, Chief, where's your wife writing to Russia for? What is Russia writing to my wife?" I says, "Oh, no. She listens to shortwave radio. She probably was getting a verification card." And that's exactly what was happening. Uncle Sam does keep an eye on you. Your FBI story reminded me of that.
Well, that was one of the other aspects that Lisa had mentioned in her book, is that many people would couch what they said in their letter in such a way they wanted to be known. They were trying to, provide you with a service, but, that they would separate themselves. I may not believe everything I'm hearing, but, they wanted to make it very clear that, they weren't a sympathizer as much as they were trying to provide a public service. And, one of the things I had mentioned, and I may still live to regret this, but, I've heard from different people in the hobby at different times, I have heard people tell me that under certain circumstances that somehow or another the federal government would ask for shortwave bands, even just for listening bands, to be disabled on people's home sets if they were viewed in some way to be a threat. Now, conversely, I have had other people tell me, they would go down the devil's advocate rule. How would they know who they were? How would they know they even had a radio? How would they go about getting it into a show? How could this possibly have done? And this has gone back and forth on several occasions, with yays and nays on both sides. And I don't know if anybody's ever heard anything, in that regard, as far as somebody that may have been first generation or was somehow had a family member who may not have been on the right side of the FBI at the time, and wound up having their two shortwave bands have the coil disconnect. I'm not sure. I don't know, but it's an interesting point. Let's see who else has. Let's go to.
I have a story about that.
Yes, sir.
I in 1946.
Yes.
I was listening to hams talking on the 160 meter band and the 80 meter band. And then my radio stopped working. It was an ordinary table model radio, but it had enough shortwave to do those. So I took it to the repair shop because I didn't know anything about radios yet. And they got it working. When I got it back home, it didn't receive the shortwave bands anymore. So I went back to complain, and he said, "Oh, I'm sorry. We were told during World War II to disable the shortwave bands on any radio that came in for repair." And he said, "I got so in the habit of doing that I did it."
What city was that in? What town were you based in at that time?
New York City, Manhattan, New York City.
Very interesting. I hope he repaired it for you.
No, he didn't. He said he couldn't fix it. So that was the end of my listening to hams for many, many years.
Very interesting.
But it was what got me interested in ham radio.
Very good. George, did you have your hand up? I'm sorry.
Then my hobby, pardon?
I'm sorry. I thought I saw another hand. Go ahead, Per.
But then my hobby became automobiles, and I love messing around with cars. And I still have my first car, which is a 1928, and a couple of other really old cars. But now I, just got my finally amateur radio license a few weeks ago, and so I'm going to get moving on that.
Very good. Very good.
Great.
George, did you have something else to add in? I saw your hand up.
Yeah, so I just had one more question for Lisa. I was wondering if in all of the research, whether she had heard of this occurring in any other countries, or was it mainly just the U.S. that you tripped across? I figured, Canada or Australia or England or something like that.
That's a great question. I recall having a brief exchange with someone where, ironically, someone was stationed, I believe, in India. They received a message in some way, shape, or form. They sent a note to their family in Illinois And that family then tried to reach out to the POW family here in the States. I just remember this very intriguing crossing the world line of messaging. But I do not recall, and I also recall seeing something from South Africa, but I do not recall seeing anything in mass or more than an anomaly here and there regarding other countries. But I would not be surprised at all. It's amazing to me that I still get emails occasionally with people just sharing an aspect of this story that I wasn't expecting. And unbelievably, there's still so much to learn.
Ken, did you
Thank
have
you.
something? Did I see your hand?
Yes,
Yes,
you
sir.
did. It's not really radio related, but I should tell the story. My father entered World War II in 1942 and went for basic training in Georgia. He was 18 years old. And he wrote letters to his mother back in Massachusetts almost daily. And I still have all his letters, and they're really sweet. He loved his mother. He was shipped after basic to North Africa. He was in Operation Torch. He was shot and left for dead, picked up by the Germans, taken to a field hospital. They dressed his wounds, and they took him to a base hospital in Tunisia. And he was there for a year, barely alive, until Allied troops liberated the area. And his mother hadn't heard anything from him in that whole time until the liberation, which was about a year and a half later. And then he came back to the United States and recuperated in Walter Reed Hospital for a year. And then he was discharged. So I had to tell his story.
Thank you for sharing that.
Well, let's see. Does anybody have anything they would like to bring to the show and tell this evening? And if you have a question for Lisa, feel free. You can pop it in the chat if you want. But do we have some items to see? Oh, I see we have a full house with items here. We'll kind of go around the block here because it looks like the Brady Bunch on my end. So we'll start with Bruce Burgess here, though we had a little bit grayer than the Bradys were. Mr. Burgess, how are you?
Yeah, I'm fine there, Paul. Well, I had no idea what to expect from Lisa's presentation, but it turns out that the radio I have to present fits right in. It's an Echophone EC1. And I've done a little reading about it to become educated. Apparently it was introduced in September of 1940. It's a 6-tube radio. And it served its purpose. It received all the way from 550 kilocycles up to 30 megacycles. And it is assumed to have produced to allow families at home to either purchase this and send them to their military servicemen, or the military servicemen could also listen to foreign broadcasts. So I was lucky enough to find this radio at Deerfield last fall in virtually perfect condition. There's not a scratch on it. It's gorgeous. The only thing it's missing is the back cardboard panel. But I'm very, very fortunate, and it seems to me that this may have been one of the type of radios that the shortwave listeners may have been using. Who knows?
Very well, very well, very well.
So that's my show.
That's in great shape. I hope I look that good when I'm that age. Mr.
Thank you.
Pereira, how are you tonight, Tom?
Very fine, thank you. I thought I'd just show a few radios as a lead-in for my talk on spy radios and CIA bugs at our next meeting. When I was a kid, it was near the end of World War II, and you could buy these wonderful World War II walkie-talkies down on Radio Row in New York City. And if you had a ham license, you could use them. They weren't very effective, but it was sort of my introduction to World War II radios, and I became hooked on them. And the next radios that I started picking up were the same radios that had been used by the code talkers during the war. And that is this radio over here. They get heavier and heavier as you get older, and the handles come off and things. But this is a radio from World War II that was used by the code talkers, the Navajo code talkers in the Pacific. And at that time, you could buy a book, which was called the Surplus Radio Conversion Manual. And it had the schematic diagrams of all these radios inside, and you could use that book, and it told you how to put them on the ham bands, and that was just a wonderful thing. As time went on, I became more and more involved in collecting German radios, and this is a radio that was used on a submarine. It was called a morale radio, and they very, very heavy, and it was used to allow the people on the submarine to listen to Hitler's broadcasts and listen to the marching music from Germany. And they're quite unusual, very interesting radio. It's a lot of fun to fire it up and get it going, but that kind of thing appealed to me. And most recently, as most of you know, I have become in love with something called the German Enigma machine. And this is a genuine World War II German Enigma machine. Let's see if I'm very, very heavy. They get heavier every year, but this is an Enigma machine. And maybe if I tilt it a little bit, I can show you it working. When you press the keys, let's see if I tilt this down a little bit. If you press the keys on the keyboard, light bulbs light up on the light bulb panel. And the Enigma machine works by encoding the letters you type into the keyboard into letters that are lit up by light bulbs. And you then write down the message and you transmit that over to another Enigma machine somewhere, and you type those coded letters into the other Enigma. Long as it's set to the same settings, you get the original message back. So that's where I'm at now. God knows what's going to be next.
Well,
you can't, it's very addictive collecting this stuff.
Well, that submarine set, I'm sure, was provided a certain amount of ballast as well as anything else there. But you know,
all right, it'll be down in a few minutes.
Have to mention with the Enigma as well that, you know, the breaking of Enigma code by the British was just immeasurable impact on turning the tide, not only with the U-boats, but just in general in the war. So let's move along here.
Just
John.
one other thing, if you don't mind. I'd like to show you something called Enigma Machine Beer. And it has just been announced by a beer making company in, of all places, Laconia, New Hampshire.
All right.
And it is made with Enigma hops. So we just discovered this. And of course, we had to run over and buy a case of this stuff. I haven't dared taste it yet.
Yeah.
If it tastes anything like an Enigma machine smells, it's not going to be a great beer.
Have you decoded the flavors yet in your mouth?
Not even yet. But
I wouldn't suggest trying to use the machine after you have a few of those, but that's for another night.
By the time I give the talk next
You may need
meeting,
one.
I will have had an Enigma beer and be able to report.
Very good. Full report expected, Commander. Mr. Nowasaki.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Okay, good. I'm trying to do a multimedia type thing here because I'm on my computer, but I'm also on my phone.
Very good.
So this is, oh, did I lose it? Here we go.
No, we still hear you.
So this is a 1942 car radio made by Philco. And the reason that it's a World War II story is, of course, after December 7th and the bombing of Pearl Harbor, all the automobile manufacturers switched over to wartime production. So the company, I'm going to lose it again. So the company that had all of these radios in a warehouse was wondering, well, what are we going to do with all these car radios now that people aren't making cars anymore? And it's a 6-volt radio, you know, ran on a vibrator, And so what they did was they took these radios, and let's see if I can do this here. They added a transformer to the radio. They took out the vibrator, and they added a power cord, and then they set about building a chair side type radio. So I have it's called a Philco model A-801. Down below you can see where the speaker is in this sort of multi-tiered kind of deco-ish piece of furniture. And it has that same car radio that has been mounted in this piece of furniture.
I can see that it's a car radio.
Yeah, and so they changed the electronics to make it run on AC power as a means of trying to figure out what they were going to do with a warehouse full of car radios in 1942 when there weren't any 1942 or 43 or even maybe 44 automobiles. They figured by the time the war was over, the designs of the cars would change, you know, and maybe the style of the dashboard would change, and so the radios wouldn't fit. So they had to come up with something in the wartime to move these radios along. So they turned them into home radios, and I was fortunate enough to find the chairside radio. And then about 2 years afterwards, at an automotive swap meet, I recognized the same radio that was on the ground with the transformer, even though it wasn't in a chairside. You know, it looked like a car radio, so it was at an automotive swap meet. So I picked it up as a backup and a parts radio for my chairside. So
Very nice.
that's my World War II story.
That's outstanding.
All right.
That's the first time I've ever seen.
John, did you have something to share, or should we slide down to Roy?
I have a comment about that kind of radio.
Yes.
I have a 1940 Plymouth radio that looks exactly like that. And in fact, they kept the same design geometry of the radio all the way to 1948 in Chrysler products. So if the warehouse had been a little more patient, they could have sold the radio after the war.
Very good. Very good. How about Roy? Do you have something this evening for us?
Yeah, I do have one
Good
radio
evening.
here. Good evening. So it's, if we can see that, kind of looks like a toaster, but it's a 1946
Bendix.
Bendix Aviation Corp. And it's a no shortwave, but it's an All-American 5 in really nice condition. And so that's it. And Lisa, thank you very much. Your talk was fascinating. So
Thank you.
Thank
I
you.
appreciate that. Thank you.
Well, I think that's the other thing that we forget, and maybe Lisa, that if you're not a real radio buff, as we have a few here, just a few, but you know, during the war, commercial production of consumer radios ceased, much like the vehicles that John had mentioned earlier. So anybody who had a set better have a handy repairman in town or be pretty handy themselves, because it was quite an effort to get parts or to get something repaired, and you certainly couldn't go out and buy new ones. So, you know, for these folks, especially these prolific listeners like, was it Cynthia McKee? I mean, she, I'm sure, was handy at swapping out a few tubes, or probably needed to have a good repair person. Hopefully her doctor husband had a repairman on his client list as well to do a little bit more bartering with. So, Mr. Phillips, how are you tonight? Did you have something to share with us? I think Bruce is on mute.
Bruce, you're muted.
How's that? You are muted.
There we go.
We're better. Okay, sure. As an earlier discussion, everybody knows a Theta radio, but and this is the pre-war version. But what's unusual here, this is a 116, and you can see the bottom there. It's hard to do, but that's the short wave band on the bottom. And so when I got this radio, it had the short wave band had been disconnected in it for the reasons that were earlier discussed. So
that's a looker.
It was, and you know, that was what the average person in New York City was listening to, trying to hear the news from back home somewhere in Europe.
Very nice. That's a pretty looking set there, Bruce.
That is a 6-tube radio instead of an All-American 5, because I had to get the short wave in it. And this is what most people in Germany had, because it was about all Hitler would like to have. It's a huge 2-tube. I think you can see that on the back somewhere. Yeah, you can see those 2 tubes right there. And it didn't get you too far, but it would get you Hitler broadcasts, and that was the whole goal. So there's a tiny little boss sticker up top there. And,
Volkswagen of radios.
This was the People's Radio, as it was called, and given to me by a friend over in Germany. They went through in Germany and did the same thing. They would come through your house and knock out any kind of short wave you had, and take away your radios and maybe leave you one of these.
Well, the Germans had active, they had units, they had vans with directional finder. They would seek you out if you were listening to the BBC, and it was not the visit you wanted to have at 3 in the morning, I'm sure. So thank you, Bruce.
You're welcome.
Bear, anything to show? No? Fred? Yes, Fred. We're going to just kind of go through the block, so we'll get to everyone. Yes, Frederick.
Okay, I don't have anything from that era because I wasn't around. I got a lot of my radios are crystal radios from the beginning of the dawn of radio up to about the 30s or so. But I did come across a couple interesting things. One is like similar to what I had when I was a kid, and it was a little tiny crystal radio. And when I was a kid, I used to attach one wire. I have one with 2 wires. I put one wire in the bed spring, one wire in the outlet, and listen to WABC and on Sunday nights, pretty much. And I just came across this guy, which I saw on Radio Attic, and it's GR84 crystal set, and it looks like that.
Oh, cool.
But the tuning is rather unique. See, there's a, as you tune it, it moves the slider in and out, the ferrite. I haven't hooked it up or anything, but I got it in the original box and packing and everything. So that's the things that I could dig up right at the moment.
Very cool.
And the talk was very good. I learned a lot. Well, thank you very much.
Hey, Fred, just another member benefit of being with Neville.
Yep, don't forget Tuesday nights if you guys want to get on 3925 at about 10 to 9 or so. Joe's been there a number of times.
We'll be there. Mr. Harris, anything to share with us this evening?
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Yeah, no, I don't have anything to share this evening. I just wanted to say I enjoyed Lisa's presentation. It was really moving. And thanks for Lisa, and also thank you for arranging it. It was really, really fine.
Well, you're
Thanks.
very welcome.
Thank you.
Mr. Devonshire, how are you this evening?
I'm doing very well. Let me make sure that, yes, I am unmuted. Yes, thank you, Lisa, for an excellent presentation this evening. I thoroughly enjoyed it. And also thank you for the link to the Victory Angels. I took a look through the site while things were going on, and that's another excellent site as well. So I'm going to be moving on. The New Jersey Club is actually having a event tonight at 9 o'clock on Zoom. This one's going to be about Fred's passion with crystal radios. So good to see everybody tonight. And if you're around 9:30 tomorrow morning for our usual Friday morning chat on 3805, talk to you then. Have a good night.
Thank you, Joe. Good night, Joe.
I'll be there.
Len, anything to share with the group?
I have nothing from the 40s. Everything I have the 20s. I really enjoyed the presentation, and I'd like to thank you for doing it for us. And I think this is one of the best Zoom meetings we've had.
Oh, thank you.
Thanks.
Bill, anything additional to put in the pot?
Yeah, I don't have a World War II telegraph key upstairs here. I do have one, but this one is billed as a J38 QRP. about 2 inches long, a miniature key. And I don't know what makes it a J38, except that it's a common copy of a common oval brass key that was used on J38s. But to be a legitimate J38, it would have to have the Bakelite base with all kinds of markings on it. But it's my bolo tie.
Let's see how anybody could wear a tie when it's this hot, but if anybody could, it would be you. Very nice.
And thank Lisa for that good presentation. I enjoyed it, and I'm going to look her book up.
All right.
Thank you.
Larry, we'll get back to you, Per. We haven't forgot you,
Okay.
Larry. Yes, sir.
I really don't have anything tonight. I was going to go downstairs and dig out. I had a World War II U.S. military command set, and this particular one is not your usual command set, because instead of going on the HF bands, it was VHF, and used tubes such as 829s. But unfortunately, at the moment, it's kind of difficult for me to dig it out, so it didn't happen. But great presentation, Lisa. Really enjoyed it. And John and Paul, and Tom, thanks for hosting.
No problem.
Thank
you. George. Anything else for us, George?
No, thanks. I don't have anything to show. I will make a comment that my Uncle Steve was, well, in fact, almost all of my uncles were in the military there during World War II. But he had up in his bedroom a Philco 38-3, I think, from 1938. That was the radio that I listened to for the first time and got me started in radios. I heard the BBC coming across live, and it was like magic coming over the air. So anyways, that was just, the only thing I had to say. So again,
All right.
Lisa, thank you so much. It was very enjoyable, and I really appreciate you taking the time to be with us.
Thank you. Thank you. I enjoyed being here.
Ken, Mr. Silvestri. Anything to show, or are you good tonight? Do you have a World War II set you would like to share? I think you're muted, Ken.
Yeah. Let's make him mute.
If he hasn't held
There
something.
we go.
There we go, Ken.
Something that another gentleman already showed is I have the Philco chairside car radio, and I can't really lift it up in front of the camera, so you have to take my word for it.
Oh, we don't want any injuries. No sports hernias tonight.
Yeah. If you ever need any spare parts, I've got that parts radio here. You're welcome to whatever pieces you might need.
Actually, this is all original. I've never even powered it up. I don't know what's inside of it. It was good to see what you showed. I didn't realize it had a vibrator.
Well, yeah, the original had a vibrator in the car. They took that out, and so it's got a transformer and a rectifier and a filter.
Okay, because there's no AC cord coming out of this thing, so I didn't know that.
All right, well, very good. Gary. How are you tonight, Gary?
Yeah, I have nothing to show tonight. I just would like to thank Lisa for the wonderful presentation. It was very interesting. I enjoyed it very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Russ. Anything to share with the radio, Russ? An exhibit? A piece to talk about?
Big went
Having
on.
a technical issue.
There we go. No.
Well, you know what? I think, there we go.
There we go.
Trouble with
He's
the
back.
internet here, but I just want to say to Lisa, thanks very much. It was very, very interesting.
Thank you.
And did Per have something else to add there, John? I know he told us his
yes.
complete name and I forgot. Yes, sir.
Two things. One, Lisa, I was not aware of the letter writing. What I had heard about was that hams would try to relay a message to a ham close enough to call the family up on the telephone to let them, local enough that they could call them up on the telephone to let them know. And as I said, I was not aware of the large amount of letter writing. Also, I could mention that the radio behind me is a 1933 RCA radio, and it has a modest amount of shortwave bands on it. But Philco then came out with a cheaper model that didn't have any shortwave bands, and they got the market because 1933 wasn't a good time to be selling a somewhat more expensive radio. $20 being more expensive than $12 or $15. That's all for me.
All right, thank you
again.
So John, if I could just share my screen, I'll show you mine, and then we can, I think, pretty much call it a night here. Let me see.
Yeah,
if,
I might just have a one question or so after you're done.
You're free.
Absolutely.
Certainly. Let's see here if I can successfully share screen. Go to what we would like to share. Get it up here. Okay.
All right.
So let's go back up to the top here. So as we were talking about morale radios, and I believe there's another member in our club, Ross Hochstrasser, who restored a Australian morale radio. There were certain radios that were produced with the intention of being extremely heavy duty, obviously not very beautiful, but to us they are, but not for home use certainly. But this is a Minerva Tropic Master, which looks to be in pretty darn good shape to me. And this is the type of thing that could take a licking and keep on ticking, as they would say. But Minerva was a small company out of Chicago, and they did their part. So I guess this was, according to the notes here from Mr. Riva, a 1945 model. So it's a little late on the scene, but obviously it has the military gray and broadcast in short wave, and it's got a very large 6-inch speaker. And I guess it's got push-pull in there. It's got a couple of 25, what does he say here? Let me get down to the correct, yep, it's got two 25 L6s in there. So again, this was the type of thing you would sit around with the crowd and have a few luckies. And if you were fortunate enough, maybe if you had a cold one to pop down, pick something up on Armed Services Radio, or just take a little break from the war. But it's a fine example, and it's in great shape. So, and I'm sure Joe has done a nice job repairing these. You don't see quite as many of these as you do some of the consumer sets. So, but Minerva made a little bit of us, but that's a nice one. And that's my show for the night. And John, you go take it away.
It was, well, just a couple of side things is, well, first and foremost, this is an outstanding presentation, Lisa. We really enjoyed it. You were just really glad you were able to spend your precious time with us, because it was, everyone seemed to really enjoy it. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
A couple of things. Are you looking ahead to maybe seeing a version 3, edition 3 of your book? Because this seems like it could be an ongoing project for years to come.
I'm certainly open to it. The reason we did number 2 was we just were overwhelmed by so many collections people were sharing with us and new information that we felt it just wouldn't be okay to not publish another version. And so if I got to a point where, again, I felt like, wait a minute, we've learned so much, we have too much to share, I can't do it just with a Facebook group, like putting small chats out there doesn't do it justice. So if we had that much in addition to the second edition, we would certainly do a third edition. Right now, I don't see that happening, but not to say that wouldn't happen with more information that we would receive in another year. Certainly, I think the play that Kelly is working on in Portland, I'm thrilled about that happening. I hope that when she has a date for that, I'll be flying out there just to celebrate her work and what she's done with the story. And then I'm hopeful still that we can get some sort of congressional recognition in the few short years to come. Hopefully it doesn't take too long. So I think wonderful things are happening to still celebrate the men, women, and children that took part. Just right now, a third edition isn't on the radar, but it could be.
Well, great. Well, thank you. In my personal collection, almost all of my radios are post-World War II. In fact, most of them are German. But I do happen to have an Emerson 38, but it's needing of restoration. It was a very close friend of ours' father bought it brand new, but it has output problems, and it's been worked on a couple of times, and it's almost incomprehensible what someone did to it. So that's a different story. But it was very much great to have you. Also, this video, this Zoom session is being recorded. We're going to post on our YouTube site for the club. So you'll get to, anyone who wants to have another look at this, plus I'll publish it for everybody so they have a chance to see it, to be able to revisit. This has been, a great event. We really appreciate this.
Thank you. And thank you both again for inviting me.
Well, Lisa, on behalf of the New England Vintage Electronic Club, thank you. And, when they make the movie, if you need some props, you need some radios, I think I know a few guys who may be able to help you out. So you just keep in touch.
Thank you. Good.
All right. Good night, all. Take care.
Thank you very much, Lisa. Good night, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Good night now.
Good night.
I got a question.
Lisa.